Ominous Olivia barely said anything, actually, but when she did, it was enough to make any mouse stop and listen. There was something about her. Something was a little bit off, and it made even the boldest mice hesitate before approaching her. The tavern she stayed in was alive with chatter as she sipped her warm cheese drink. Mice from all over the village gathered here to unwind, share stories, and of course, enjoy a good cheese platter or two. But even in the midst of laughter and noise, Olivia sat quietly in her corner, just watching. Her fur blended in with the shadows, and her eyes, those unsettling, always watching eyes, they glinted in the low light. It wasn't that people disliked her. No, it was more that she made people nervous. Olivia was the kind of mouse who didn't engage in small talk that filled the tavern. She didn't laugh at the cheesy jokes that everyone else found hilarious. She didn't involve herself in the typical village drama. She simply existed like a shadow at the edge of every conversation, sipping her cheese drink and observing. Tonight, as the fire was crackling, something was different. Olivia noticed it before anyone else did, though she didn't let it show. Her paw rested lightly on her mug as she continued to sip her drink, her gaze never leaving the doorway. The tavern door creaked open, and a stranger walked in, a mouse no one had ever seen before. His fur was scruffy, his whiskers twitched nervously, and he wore a cloak that had seen better days. The stranger scanned the room, his eyes flickering from mouse to mouse before they landed on Olivia. He froze, his paw tightening on the strap of his satchel, and for a moment, it looked like he might turn and leave. But something in Olivia's stillness held him there. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him in any way, but she just stayed there sipping her cheese drink. Without a word, the stranger walked across the room toward her table. The tavern grew quieter as the other mice noticed the newcomer. Conversation slowed. Eyes darted toward the pair in the corner, but no one spoke. No one dared interrupt whatever was about to happen. Neither of them had talked yet. The stranger stopped in front of Olivia's table, his paws fidgeting nervously. He cleared his throat, but didn't look up. She continued to sip her cheese drink, still holding her gaze right at the cheese drink and not looking up. "Olivia," the stranger said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. Olivia didn't respond immediately. She took another slow sip, set her mug down on the table, and finally took a look up at him. "Who's asking?" she said, her voice low and measured. The stranger swallowed, "No," regretting his decision to approach her, but it was too late to back out now. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the tavern as if looking for a way out. I need your help," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Olivia raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. She leaned back in her chair, her paws resting on the edge of the table, and waited. The stranger hesitated, then pulled a small folded piece of paper out of his satchel. He placed it on the table in front of Olivia. His paws were shaking slightly. I've heard things, things other mice don't. You've helped others before, and I'm desperate." Olivia's gaze flicked to the paper, then back to the stranger. She didn't touch it. She didn't even seem interested in what it was that he was offering. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice so quiet that only he could hear. "Desperation makes mice very foolish," she said. "You should be careful where you go looking for answers." The stranger's whiskers twitched and he licked his lips nervously. I don't have a choice," he whispered. "I need to find him. You're the only one who can help me." For a long moment, Olivia said nothing. She simply stared there at the stranger, her expression unreadable. The tension in the tavern was thick. It was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone was watching, pretending not to, but unable to tear their eyes away from the scene unfolding in the corner. She just kept sipping her cheese drink, and it was very, very intense. Finally, Olivia reached for the paper. She unfolded it slowly, her eyes scanning the symbols and scribbled notes on the paper. Whatever was written there, it made no sense to anyone but her. After a moment, she folded the paper again and set it back on the table. She looked up at the stranger, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Who told you about me?" she asked, her voice still soft, but there was an edge to it now. The stranger hesitated. I heard stories in the northern villages. They said you were the one to go to when there was no one else who can help." Olivia's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile, an unsettling smile that didn't reach her eyes. She leaned back in the chair again, her paws wrapping around her cheese drink, and she continued to take another sip. "Stories," she said, her voice almost mocking. "Stories have a way of getting twisted, don't they?" The stranger didn't know how to respond, so he stood there, shifting awkwardly from one paw to the other. He glanced toward the door, clearly wondering if he should leave, but something kept him rooted to the spot. He had to know. Olivia let the silence stretch on for a moment longer before she spoke up again. "What makes you think I can help you find him?" "Because no one else can," the stranger replied, his voice trembling slightly. I've tried everything. I've gone to everyone. No one even believes he's real, but I know he is. I know he's out there, and I know you can help me. Please, I'm begging you. If you know where he is, if you have time to help me, please." Olivia's expression didn't change. She took another sip of her cheese drink, her eyes never leaving the stranger's face. The other mice in the tavern were watching, waiting for a response. Finally, she set her mug down and stood up. Her movements were slow and deliberate, as if every action had been taken in advance. The stranger took a step back as she approached him, but Olivia didn't seem to notice. She stopped in front of him, her eyes locked onto his, and for the first time there was something dangerous in her gaze. "I don't have to do anything," she said quietly. "You came here for help, but you don't understand what you're asking for. Some things are better left unfound. Some mice are better left forgotten." The stranger's eyes widened and he opened his mouth to protest, but Olivia cut him off with a sharp glance. "But if you're determined," she continued, her voice softer now, "then I'll help you. But be warned, the answers you seek won't bring you peace. They'll only bring more questions and pain." The stranger hesitated, clearly shaken by her words, but he nodded. "I don't care. I need to know." Olivia stared at him for a moment longer, and then she gave him a small nod. She turned and walked toward the door, her steps slow and purposeful. The stranger followed, glancing over his shoulder at the other mice who were still watching in silence. As they left the tavern, the door swang to shut behind them. The tension in the room seemed to dissipate. Mice began talking again, their voices were hushed, and no one seemed eager to discuss what had happened. Outside, the night was cold and quiet. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the village streets. Olivia led the stranger down a narrow alleyway, her paws stepped silent on the cobblestone. The stranger followed close behind, his heart pounding in his chest. They walked for what felt like hours, deeper into the village, deeper and deeper, past the houses and shops until they reached the edge of the forest. The trees loomed tall and dark, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. Olivia stopped at the entrance to the forest and turned to face the stranger. "He's out there," she said softly, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "But once you cross into those woods, there's no going back. Are you sure you want to do this?" The stranger hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "I'm sure." Olivia stared at him for a moment longer, her eyes searching for any signs of doubt in his face. When she found none, she gave him a small, almost sad smile. "Then, may you find what you're looking for." And with that, she turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving the stranger alone at the edge of the forest and still sipping her cheese drink, almost finished with it. He stood there for a long moment, staring into the dark, tangled woods. Then, with a deep breath, he stepped forward and crossed into the trees, vanishing into the night. Back in the tavern, the mice returned to their usual conversation, though the memory of Olivia's departure lingered in a shadow in the corner of the room. No one knew where she had gone or what fate awaited the stranger who had followed her, but one thing was certain. Ominous Olivia was not a mouse to be taken lightly, and those who sought her help often found more than they bargained for. Do you guys mess with Ominous Olivia?